this night's, actually last night's incident in the Baltics, have anyone woke you up this night with the red alert, or it was just a routine for you?
No, in fact, we heard about it yesterday morning. I'm not sure exactly when the incident occurred, but during one of our regular NATO meetings, the American ambassador mentioned that this had occurred, and only later, actually, looking at my iPad this morning, I saw the video. But it's clearly the latest example of a provocative behavior by the Russian military close to NATO's borders. In this case, the event may have been in international waters. It may not have been illegal, but it's still irresponsible. And it shows that Russia seems to be doing the opposite of what should be required in a time of tension, which is to reduce the risks of accidents, to reduce the possibility that a local incident could escalate into a serious confrontation. But alas, they seem to like being unpredictable and provocative.
You know, it's always great to speak to one of the NATO chairpersons as an American, because the word deterrence is not very much used in NATO headquarters on behalf of the Northern Europeans, should I say? So what do you make of it? Do you think the escalation is possible right now, or in the upcoming future, in the upcoming weeks and months?
Well, first of all, I would say deterrence has never been out of fashion at NATO, and I think all allies have recognized that deterrence is about preventing conflict. It's a perfectly positive, peace-loving term, because we have deterrence in order that no adversary, whether it be Russia or President Assad or anyone else, even think about challenging our security and challenging our borders. But of course, deterrence is now very much risen to the very top of the agenda in the wake of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And I think we have very effective deterrence today. There's a lot of military power when you add it all up in the NATO alliance. But we do have to do more to improve the readiness of those forces, their ability to deploy quickly. We have been doing some of that since the Wales summit with the so-called spearhead force, which can be brought into the eastern flank or anywhere in 2 to 3 days. And we're going to press allies to continue to improve readiness in the coming years. At the same time, deterrence, we've decided, requires a stronger presence along that eastern flank, just so any surprise moves or hybrid attacks could be met immediately by multinational NATO forces. And that's so that the Russians would, again, think twice and be deterred and not attack us. So I think all Europeans and North Americans get it, and we have a lot of work to do. You asked whether there's a risk of an escalation now. I think we believe the likelihood of Russia directly challenging NATO is quite low. As I said, we have a lot of military power behind us. But we can't be completely complacent. The fact that Russia was prepared to violate international law, ignore the Budapest Memorandum and so many other agreements in what it did to Ukraine and what it's still doing to Ukraine in the Donbass, suggests we have to plan for worst-case scenarios. And that's what we're doing. We're much more vigilant. We're improving our sharing of intelligence, so we have earlier warning of any suspicious activities. And as I said, we're improving the readiness of our forces so that we can respond if necessary.
What do you expect from Russians in Donbass and from pro-Russian fellows that still fight there? And, I think there was a little swift towards Syria, and some of the fighters had gone to fight there, but now they seem to stop it and to get back to Ukrainian soil. But you're far more informed than myself on that. So what do you expect?
Well, well, first of all, exactly how much of a withdrawal is taking place in the Russian presence in Syria is somewhat unclear. We've seen a lot of military activity even since the so-called withdrawal. And I'm not sure there was more than a token transfer of some personnel from eastern Ukraine to Syria. So I think we have to focus on what has been and remains in eastern Ukraine, which is a mixture of locally recruited forces together with some so-called volunteers from Russia and regular Russian troops, even if they've taken off their insignias and adopted assumed names. We know quite clearly, not just from intelligence, but from open sources, from just watching social media, that there's lots of Russians still in eastern Ukraine. And it looks like in recent days that they are trying to heat up the situation with increased evidence of ceasefire violations, the use of heavy weapons which are supposed to be withdrawn or locked up and under international supervision. But I can't speculate now whether this is the beginning of a new campaign or whether it's just pressure tactics trying to influence Ukraine's internal affairs. But from the NATO perspective, what is needed is real compliance with all aspects of the Minsk agreements, including the ceasefire, and that the political elements of Minsk should be implemented hand in hand with the security elements. It's not, Ukraine does its part first and then Russia delivers. It has to be simultaneous.
So, but the Minsk process is a failure. It doesn't work. We haven't got any access to the border. Many more of the steps that should have been done are not done. So what's next? What's next on the table?
Well, certainly the results thus far are disappointing. I wouldn't say that one can declare the process a failure just yet. International pressure obviously needs to be maintained, including the sanctions. Russia needs to understand that half measures are not going to satisfy the international community or Ukraine. But there is some sequencing in Minsk, and whether you like it or not, the reestablishment of Ukrainian control over the border it does come later in the process. But clearly, when I speak of simultaneous or parallel actions, there has to be movement on security, which is supposed to be first, ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weapons, and the political measures relating to decentralization, organization of elections under Ukrainian law with OSCE supervision. You can't have an election if the security situation is the way it is today.
So, but you say that we're speaking of the regaining of the control of the border later. What's the deadline? When do you expect it to
Well, the
come?
deadline for everything was the end of last year. So
I know, but there should be a new deadline.
We're in uncharted territory. I think first, both sides, with the help of their international partners, need to get serious on the security aspects and the current escalation and the violations that are being reported by the OSCE in recent days, and especially on the separatist side. So to get the first parts of Minsk on track, then we can perhaps envisage more of a timetable for the completion of Minsk. Right now it's a bit unclear without agreement even on the first steps.
Next week you're going to have this NATO Russia Committee meeting, first time in 2 years or something. Why? Why do you need that? I mean, it looks like a diplomatic blow to Ukraine, honestly speaking.
I don't think it should anyway be seen as a blow to Ukraine, because one of the main items on the agenda, the first item on the agenda, is to discuss the crisis in and around Ukraine, and for allies to have the opportunity both to explain to Russia why we see Moscow as responsible for what's happened in Ukraine and for the breakdown in the whole European security system, and to make clear what they need to do, which is full implementation of Minsk. So it's an opportunity to send very clear messages and show clear allied unity to Russia on Ukraine. But why are we having this meeting? When we suspended our cooperation 2 years ago, we explicitly said that diplomatic channels remain open and that we're prepared to continue to talk to Russia, even if the practical joint work of previous years is off the table. We actually had 2 meetings of the NATO Russia Council after the annexation of Crimea, so it's not secret. They were not very successful meetings, but they were. But it was living up to our position that we should at least talk to the Russians, explain what we find objectionable in their behavior, and also to try to manage a very dangerous relationship with incidents like the Donald Cook, not the first of their kind. So we are consulting with Ukraine so that there's no suspicions about anything that would jeopardize Ukraine's interests. I'm here having a lot of meetings. We'll have a meeting of the NATO Ukraine Commission early next week so that allies will understand the Ukrainian perspective and that they can compare it with what Ambassador Grushko has to say.
But are there any particular sort of demands that you may have during that meeting to Russians to implement the Minsk process, to implement I mean, some particular dates, some particular
No, this is, I mean, NATO is not in charge of the negotiations. I mean, members who are involved, I'm sure, will make perhaps more substantial statements, Germany and France, United States. But we're not transferring the responsibility for the Minsk process from the Normandy group to NATO. But it's still an opportunity for our members to speak out, to show their unity, disabuse the Russians of any notions they can divide us, and make clear that they're not going to get back to business as usual with half measures.
We have the Warsaw summit upcoming. What Ukraine can expect?
Well, I think Ukraine can expect, first of all, to see NATO taking very seriously its responsibilities for defense and deterrence, which is ultimately good for the stability of all of Europe, but also NATO showing its continued commitment to countries like Ukraine that face this unacceptable pressure from Russia and efforts to limit their sovereignty. So to highlight that, as I announced at the conference, we will have a NATO-Ukraine Commission meeting at the highest level with President Poroshenko and the NATO leaders. And that's an opportunity to hear from him an assessment of the situation, but also to agree on kind of the priorities for our joint work following the summit in support of Ukraine's defense reforms. So this is an opportunity, I think, to show visibly that NATO stands by Ukraine and is continuing to help it, as we have been since, actually since 1992.
You will have very particular section with Ukraine.
Yes, there'll be these NATO summit meetings, even though they all take place in about 24 hours, usually have multiple meetings in different formats. So there'll be several meetings of just the NATO allies by themselves. There'll be some meetings in which the European Union leadership sits in, and maybe a few other close partners. And then there'll be a dedicated meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Commission at that high level, the heads of state and government. So you'll have Poroshenko sitting there at the table alongside President Obama, Prime Minister Cameron,
in Warsaw,
Angela Merkel, all the NATO leaders.
The very last question, sir. There's a lot of talk and less action on behalf of the Ukrainian Defense Minister in reforming the system. We've heard it from various experts, from various NATO experts, even from the Deputy Defense Minister of the U.S. today. Yeah. It was unofficially, but it was pretty tough. What do you make of it? How tough is the situation? How long will you hold the poker face, tolerating the really weak attempts to do something to reform here, the military sector as well as the others?
Well, I think I was pretty open in my remarks to the conference that we see a mixed picture. And clearly Ukraine has set out very clear and ambitious goals, which we highly praise. And we now have a good working relationship between our NATO advisors who are here full-time in Kiev and the Ministry of Defense, General Staff, Ministry of the Interior, all the partners, the National Security and Defense Council. But we still see a lot of foot dragging. We still see some inertia within the bureaucracy. We even see some people that seem not fully committed to reform and might even be resisting it, even as they tell us what we want to hear. So, there's a challenging situation for Ukraine. They really now have to seize the opportunity, especially now that a new government has been formed after a couple of months of uncertainty. Now they have to make up for lost time and get this reform moving. You know, I said in my speech, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. You know, delivering in action on the ambitious goals that the Ukrainian people expect. And I think an important part of this is giving more authority to the parliament to oversee the reform process, because this is ultimately a matter for the whole nation. And it's important for the whole nation that parliament have its authority to oversee the reform process.
So in fact, we just have 2 months left, right?
Well, for the summit meeting, yeah. But this is, we don't expect it to be over, but we would hope to see some very substantial progress between now and Warsaw. We have 3 months, not 2 months, so that's a little more, more generous.
I see, so. Well, thanks a lot.